If you're enjoying this program, consider leaving a tip at ko-fi/World Cinema History. Or, for more content, join our DVD Extras Club. Again, that's ko-fi/World Cinema History. Or follow the link in the episode description. ko-fi/World Cinema History. You know, the reason we do as much queer adjacent content on this show as we do is because when I had first switched from doing UK cinema to world cinema, I got a bunch of shit from people saying foreign films are gay. And I decided, well, if that's how you're going to feel anyway, we're going to cover them more. So, you know, try me, motherfuckers. I'm Eric Trommater.
I'm Erin Brown.
I am Sila Blume.
I'm Nicole De Meneses.
I'm Jennifer Trujillo.
I'm Chrissy Mahan.
I'm Laura Petrie.
And this is World Cinema History. Into the face of the young man who sat at the terrace of the Hotel Magnifique, there had crept a look of furtive shame, which announces that an Englishman is about to speak French. That, of course, was P.G. Wodehouse from his 1935 novel, The Luck of the Bodkins. And this week, as last, this American is about to do the same thing as we delve into our third French language film, and our first actually from France, 2019's Portrait de la jeune fille fou, directed by Céline Sciamma, which was given the blessedly easy to pronounce English title Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Eric, do you want a short synopsis for any listeners who aren't familiar with the film? I just had one ready in case you wanted one, because we had done one last time.
Erin and Sila and I just aren't pithy enough to... We'd end up doing a plot summary for 2 hours, you know?
Just put aside a short one just in case you wanted one. So I'll read it real quick. Portrait of a Lady on Fire. In 18th century France, Marianne, a young painter, is commissioned to secretly paint Eloise's wedding portrait. Disguising her work as companionship, Marianne observes Eloise during walks and conversations, gradually earning her trust. As the portrait takes shape, so does the intense and forbidden romance between them, and one that burns brightly but cannot survive within the confines of their society.
Nicole, glad to have you here. We had a great time discussing Humanist Vampire with you. I want to talk about one of the crossovers that gets talked about with this and Humanist Vampire, and that is, of course, the talk about gaze. And by gaze, of course, I'm spelling it G-A-Z-E, which is the female gaze. This month we are doing all female directors, and the difference it makes having a woman behind the camera. You, as a director, probably have the best bird-eye view of that.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I really do love Portrait of a Lady on Fire. The film is just a beautiful examination of, there's a beautiful power dynamic and the female gaze and how that power shifts as the two women grow closer together, from the artist and the subject to, the subject actually getting her own agency and making her own choices. And there's kind of a nice coming of age aspect to it, in that they're both hunger for desire and hunger for love, and how complicated that can be within the oppressive structure of the time frame that they're living in. It's a beautiful film, and just speaking directly about the director and some of her intent, she had made a beautiful film prior with the same actress called Water Lilies. I feel like that romantic partnership with her lead actress definitely carried over in Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Just the delicate nature in how she showcases that actress and that performance that comes from that actress. So it's a complicated story, but I do love how they portrayed it, the female gaze in it.
And we should point out Adèle Haenel, who had been her partner for years. This was made as a love letter to her after their partnership had dissolved. Oh, those mature French, because I cannot imagine an American director being able to do that for one of his or her former lovers.
The French definitely know how to showcase lust, desire, and love. So kudos to the French.
Vive la France! I make fun of French movies all the time, But I have to say, it's not because I'm mad. It's usually just because I'm disappointed. Because, of course, I grew up on French film. The French New Wave, Godard, Truffaut, that whole movement, and before that, Jean Renoir, Marcel Carné. Last week when we were doing our 10 favorite films of all time, 4 of mine were French, including one we'll talk about later because it comes up in this film, Jean Cocteau's Orpheus. When I look at French film today, Gérard Depardieu is under house arrest for basically rape. You have the female stars coming out against the Me Too movement, and I just don't recognize a lot of French cinema as being as rebellious as the cinema that I grew up with. So when I'm making fun of French film, that's the aspect I'm making fun of. But this film, I think, is much more steeped in that history. What differentiates this film from most of the modern French films is the building and the relationship between these characters. They don't symbolize anything. They're not here to dictate to us a thought process. They're not caricatures. And I'm going to turn to you, Jennifer, because, of course, you see a lot more queer cinema than any of us on the panel, as far as I know. I don't know the viewing habits of everyone here, but I wonder if this film had been a romance between a man and a woman, I don't think it would have worked and been as beautiful as it is, because I think it could have been hung up on the gender dynamics. Whereas because this is between 2 women, I think it freed the film up for us to both cheer for the relationship, but also realize that it had a limited amount of time and that we, like the characters, could only enjoy it for that time. But Jennifer, I'm going to turn over to you.
I watch a lot of LGBTQIA plus or queer film, but as do my compatriots here, for sure. I'm trying to absorb the question a little bit in that you said because of the gender of the 2 women. I certainly think one thing you mentioned earlier that this film could happen, that is innately queer, right? That often, especially sapphic or queer women, can overcome anything and still continue to have a high functioning relationship in other aspects of their life. And so I think that does land in the uniquely sapphic or female aspect of this film, just in the making of. I may need
So
someone
yet
to
again,
clarify that.
I'm crediting the French for something that's not French. So,
Jen, could I offer an observation of the film in terms of
Please.
like gender dynamics, and specifically
Yes.
with this one, in terms of like, if you notice, like men, whenever they are in the frame, they are relegated to a very small portion of it. These women are isolated. So ideally, in terms of like historically, like I don't think she would have been allowed to be alone, unchaperoned with a male painter. And like ideally the painting of her years later with a child might have been done by a male painter, but it's only after she's been married and she has a certain status in society. But up until that point, the reason, like, she is so isolated, and the idea that her sister, after committing suicide, has trapped her in the fate of a loveless marriage, it's because she's not allowed to be around men. And so I just don't think the scenario would actually happen in that way because she's unmarried. So it would have to, in terms of like, maybe she could be alone with somebody if she was already a married woman and she has an affair, but I don't think in the societal constructs, the way they would set it up, they would allow her to be alone unsupervised. And so that love between a male painter and her wouldn't have had the opportunity to happen. But I did as rewatching it, notice that especially when Marianne is dropped off on the shore, she has a male helping her, but they do not take up space. They are relegated to the distance because the film is not about men at all, and it's about these women and how they navigate in society, mostly isolated with other women. Even when they're with the other storyline around Sophie the maid having to get an abortion, they are all doing it within the community of the women and that they have, and they lean on other women to help them. And rarely do they bring in a male in because of societal structures and the hierarchy of that society. So,
But before I move on to our other guests, we see that sailor twice, once at the beginning of the film and once at the end of the film. And I thought what the film was implying is that was the man who impregnated Sophie. And my reason for it is that when he comes back to pick up the painting, they are shown isolated together and they're discussing something. And it felt like a very intimate scene, like these were two people who had been intimate with each other. And also, because he is the only man we ever see on the island, who else would it be? And this is why we do world cinema history, is because these are the type of conversations that we can have about films like this that we don't about, say, a Hollywood blockbuster.
Yeah,
But
it's an interesting observation. I don't know that I processed that detail. That's interesting, about the sailor. So I will rewatch it with a new eye and look at that. But it's an interesting theory for sure.
just because I think it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. If you pay attention to last week's episode, I didn't understand half of Johnny Dealman, but I still thought it was a great film.
I mean, that's part of the fun of critically discussing and analyzing, right? And especially in community, right? I think the other aspect of the gender issues is you talked about the portrait. They had tried male people doing the portrait, and she had systematically shut that down in an attempt, I think, not to end up in the marriage, to keep sabotaging it. But also because I agree with Nicole, like the relationship couldn't have developed in some ways. I bet it was chaperoned, and she may or may not have been interested in that, right? We don't know her whole origin or backstory of that part of her queerness, let's say. But she definitely, it's very clear that she is kiboshing this concept of having a portrait. And then even when she had a portrait done with a female through their relationship with the female gaze, she reevaluates the portrait and twists all of that around the perspective of who's gazing who has the power, and then what is the first portrait that she painted from two women together and a female gaze, but trying to look at it from the perspective of, I'm going to say it crassly, but selling this human, like this is her. Here's this person. Do you approve?
Well,
Do you accept
yeah,
them for this marriage?
if it's not a sale, then what is a dowry? I mean, I think you have the
No,
word.
agreed.
I think you have the word correct. I think the best scene in the film is when the Countess gets to talk for the first time in Milanese, not knowing that Marianne knew Milanese, and she discusses how the portrait came to be on the wall and how she was basically sold, and how this became her life, and how she did. And you can almost sense a bit of regret that she's having to do this to her daughter. She talks about the pride of placement, walking into the hall and seeing that her portrait was up on the halls, but understanding that her other daughter, even though she doesn't say so out loud, I think she knows that she committed suicide to not basically be sold to this Milanese man.
I'm just taking a big breath at that from a
uh,
long-standing feminist female perspective. Somebody go. I hear you on mic and go.
So, hi, I'm Chrissy Mahan. I am a working class filmmaker who loves to look at world cinema, especially like not non-US cinema, in how they portray class. And I thought that this film had a super interesting examination of class, in that there's three main characters. The person who, Eloise, who will be the subject of the portrait, the sort of like middle class person who's going to paint the portrait, and then the servant who works at this remote place where the story takes place. I saw this movie as kind of an inverse of the Todd Haynes film Carol, because in that film, the old Hollywood trope of a rich person wanting to, slum it with a working girl is kind of put, Kate Blanchett is a rich person. She goes to a department store, finds a plaything she'd like, abducts the plaything. They drive across until Kate Blanchett's character, Carol, gets bored and then runs back to New York. So the issue of consent, like in a class-based society where, that you can't, it's not really consent if the person has power over you. And I think that in this picture, I mean, looking at like consent, like the Marianne consents to a deception, and that is always, I think, a very interesting, like in literature and in film, like when the person, one of the characters, is knowingly going to deceive someone. You know, that could be a very rich vein to mine as far as like how do you make a storyline out of that.
I would just push back a little bit on for in terms of the comparison with Carol. Like in Carol, Kate Blanchett, though, it's not really her money. She is rich by connection to her husband, but it's his money because again, the societal structures, and he's being able to strong arm her with a divorce, and so her power. Even she might seem like she's in more of a position of power than the other one. If anything, she has more experience, in that relationships with women, and so maybe that's more of a power dynamic. But ideally, they're in similar places. But comparing it back to Portrait of a Lady on Fire, both the painter and both Marianne and Eloise are kind of being strong-armed by the mother. The mother is dictating payment. The mother is dictating like this schedule with them. The mother is going to be sending Eloise away to be married. And so the mother has all the control. And so in other ways, even though there is some deception at first, they still are in terms of like class and struggle with, Marianne, she's working class, and the other one has no money to speak of because she's not yet married, and she's still kind of property of the mother and beholden to the family obligations. So they're both on kind of even playing fields, and like they're struggling for their place. One maybe more working class than the other, but still I don't see that much of a power dynamic between them other than there is, you're correct, there's a little deception, but I would just push back on the other comparison to Carol having a little more power than the other one, when just societally and structurally with money and how things were organized, and that she didn't have that kind of power.
And isn't that the great line Eloise has about the convent, about how the freedom in equality that she achieved at the convent? And Laura and Sila, I know you've been waiting forever, but I do want to follow up on this now so it doesn't get forgotten. There is something of that in their relationship dynamic with the Sophie character, and the abortion that they help her get, that and there is that moment where they decide, and again, this is one of the great things about international film, is that you as a viewer can decide what it means, where they decide to recreate the abortion in a painting. And when I first saw this film in 2020, I had interpreted that as this was a traumatic incident, and this was almost like children, when they play, children recreating trauma, and that this was a traumatic event. Watching it again now, I felt like it was recording a bonding moment between the three of them, and to Chrissy's point, that there was an equality there, that that Sophie at that moment, a bit of, because, the Countess is away, that there were no divisions between class at that one moment, and that they wanted to record that, and to record that feeling of, for lack of a better phrase, sisterhood.
This is Laura Petrie. I'm the producer and founder of Cinema Sisters Film Festival in Paducah, Kentucky, the only all-lesbian film festival in the United States. And I'm glad that you brought up sisterhood, because that's what we at Cinema Sisters are trying to do, is uplift the visions and voices of lesbian filmmakers, or women, non-binary women, queer women. I believe women's voices and women's instincts can save us. And you know what I'm talking about. Politically, the world is burning. We need women in charge. So yes, that moment in the film definitely portrayed that. And that is something that we need more of. Thank you for having this show today to bring us together to highlight this perception.
Sila Blume, what were your thoughts on Portrait of a Lady on Fire?
I have always found it difficult to refer to certain things as lesbian or homosexuality. And what I mean with that is, if I don't need to announce that I am a heterosexual, then I don't think that's a need to announce that a person is a lesbian. And the way I read the film, and I watched it today, actually, I started last night for the first time, the way I understand things in life, to me, this is not a lesbian film because, and this will lead me to the second point I wanted to make, because they are manifesting in that film the way I see the film on both sides. So they don't know they're lesbians. They happen to have bonded, or they begin to like each other and to love each other, and because they're both women, we call that lesbian. But to me, that is not what the to me that is almost a secondary aspect. Lesbians. And I think the most important point is the second, and the connection to the first. I find it very profound. It's made very clear in different points. For example, when she says towards the beginning, it's not easy to relate music. And then later on, she says, love is hard to say. And these two statements connected with what she has done, namely, she was in a convent and she is very familiar with music, but only one specific music. And then the added layer of the maid going through her situation, especially the way the abortion is portrayed with the boy next to her, playfully, and it's an amazing scene. My point is that this film is very focused on of becoming, or on coming out. I'm not saying about sexuality, on growing. It's extremely heavy on growing. She does not know what an orchestra is. And at the same time, she has a very complex and very developed sense of understanding, which she makes very clear when she says to the painter that she cannot agree with this painting. She rejects what she's asking. Is that the way you see me? So throughout the film, I see many examples, especially pertaining to the three main characters, where they are going through a very intense process of growing up. Like I said, the Eloise, to me, is a very interesting, very deep person, and is a lot more than she's allowed to be in her society. The painter is in the same situation, and in the film, I see many, many signs of how intense they go through, how intensely they go through their individual forms of growing up, or becoming a lot more by chance. I'll leave it at that for now.
And I think that plays well off of what Chrissy was saying about the class differences. When you see Marianne walk in, she's soaking wet from having saved her painting, strips naked, lights her pipe. She's hungry, so she just gets into the cabinet. She has a freedom of her particular class that the upper class wouldn't have, because they would be more restricted by their particular, the maid has to go get that, and she, do you have more wine, and you can see she grabs for the bottle when the maid's about to pour it. And later on, this is something where, again, this is open for interpretation, but I felt Eloise had almost a jealousy of that kind of a freedom in someone like Marianne, who's allowed to go on a ship with a bunch of men, but not allowed to paint men nude, and there are restrictions. But given that this is 18th century France, you don't really hear no, you can't do this because you're a woman a lot on this particular island. And so that's another class difference that seems to be leveled. So I think that's a good follow-up to Chrissy's comments there. Finally, last but definitely not least, Erin Brown. This is the one question I prepped you for. We cheated on it. But Erin, when you chose... Let me read it off so I get it right. Jean Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1004 Rue Bruxelles, last week, and I said I want to pair it with Portrait of a Lady on Fire. The question I told you I was going to ask is, knowing me, having seen both films, what connection do you think I had between the two? Why was I so reminded of this film while watching Jean Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1004 Rue Bruxelles?
So to me, it looked like there was a lot of similarity in the way the films were constructed. Very minimal music. The only music that I remember there being in the film was actually in the scenes that they were in. And towards the end, there's that long shot of Eloise watching the orchestra and crying because she'd never been able to hear music before.
The last part of the Winter Movement by the Red Monk, Antonio Vivaldi.
Okay.
To be precise.
Okay. I didn't know that, but I liked it. It was it was nice, and I get why she was so moved by it, especially knowing she hadn't been able to.
She was moved by it because Marianne had played her that on the pianoforte.
Correct. Yes.
And that was her first.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Sila,
I have kind of a gap.
We all know
between...
your hatred of Vivaldi.
Well, let's not exaggerate here. I do not hate him. Obviously, I never met him, and I really do not spend any energy of my body hating anything. But he is far away from being a favorite composer of mine.
My son does orchestra, and there was one time we were driving somewhere with one of his friends, and who also is in orchestra, and they were talking about how much they preferred Vivaldi to Mozart, and I was like, that's an interesting conversation that I really can't take part in, because I'm not really well informed on classical music. Besides the lack of music apart from what was in the scenes and the long shot at the end of her reacting to the music, it was parts of women's lives that you just don't see. The thing that struck me was when they were reading Orpheus, we almost always see the story of Orpheus and Eurydice from Orpheus' perspective. We don't see what Eurydice wanted. So when they were discussing, I thought it was interesting to see their three takes on the story. Sophie was like, he's an idiot. They said very clearly not to turn around. Marianne was, he's an asshole. He just wanted the poetic memory of her and not her herself. And then Heloise was, maybe she told him to turn around. Three different perspectives, and the only one that takes Eurydice, her perspective into consideration is Heloise. And that goes along with the whole concept of gaze through the whole film. It's like, who is looking at who, and how are they looking? I thought that was a really great metaphor during the film. I also thought it was interesting at the end when Marianne had painted the scene of Orpheus turning around to see Eurydice, And it was just at the moment where they saw each other, and not her disappearing, and not him, leading her out. It was them saying a final farewell. I thought that was a really beautiful moment, especially considering she had to enter that painting in the showing under her father's name because she couldn't do it under her own name. So.
Well, thank you, Erin. And I think that we need to discuss that going next. And I'm probably going to have to just edit out my interruptions there, because my apologies, Erin. I got carried away.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the Orpheus section of this. Chrissy, you said you're a big fan of international film. Have you seen the Jean Cocteau version of Orpheus yet?
I have not.
I mentioned last week when we were doing our 10 favorite films, it is, to me, one of the great films of, not only one of the great films of all time, but one of the great works of any media of all time. And that final painting really reminded me of the Cocteau version. And that line, I think that he was being a poet instead of a lover, really, to me, reminded, because of course Jean Cocteau was more known as a poet than as a filmmaker, I think pointed to Jean Cocteau's interpretation. And again, this is my take on it, but to me, the overall theme of this, and the overall theme of the repeated Orpheus references throughout this film was, is it better to have loved and lost, or is the tragedy to have loved and been forgotten? Because the version that painting shows, and the version that Eloise is rubbing up against, is the idea that she said, turn around, because she did not want to be forgotten. And I think this is repeated at the moment where she comes out in the wedding dress as Marianne is leaving, and the last thing she says is, turn around. But you have that great directorial moment where she lets it simmer. She gives you that second. Is she going to turn around? And at that moment, what's going through your head as a viewer may change. But to me, I thought only of Orpheus turning around.
I think the parallel between the two stories is great, because we know it's a doomed romance from the beginning. And this is kind of an epic, tragic romance. But you bringing up the question of is it better to have loved and lost, or to love and be forgotten? And I think they both her seeing the painting and seeing her thumb to the page 28 in the painting. She knows that their love was real and that she was remembered, and that, there's a really great romantic scene. They're high and they've made love, and Marianne is drawing a portrait of herself inside one of Eloise's books, and it's on page 28. And it's significant that years later, when Marianne is looking at an art show at a painting of Eloise with her daughter, she is flipping through a page in the painting to the page 28. And so that signifies to Marianne and to the audience that their love was real, and that they, even though they couldn't actually be together, their moments together were real, and that love carried on. It carried on in her life, and she was able to experience other things, but still hold on to that memory of them. And so it's tragic, but we feel that weight of loss, but we also believe in the love story. So I really, this movie gets me in that, I feel they earn that love story, they earn that ending. And even though you're rooting for them, you're rooting for maybe a different ending. Realistically, it's nice that they did have that moment in time, and they're both, ideally they're both okay, even though they couldn't actually be together. The fact that they were together at all is the point. And it's nice that they had that.
Sorry, I kind of have a headcanon that Eloise's husband dies, and she gets to return and live in Paris as a wealthy widow and hires
I like that.
yeah, hires Marianne as her. She's a patroness of Marianne's work, and so they have to work closely together. That's my headcanon. Also, that when you saw that she had her thumb on page 28, I almost cried. That was so beautiful.
Well, and
Boy,
there's also I would just say just in the very beginning, the way Marianne is posing for her students, she's wearing a similar dress that Eloise wears when they first meet, and so there is a shift in observer to being observed by, like, just a shift in time, a shift in like their either growing as people, and like it'd be. I know we're not going to get a sequel, but it would be fun to revisit the characters in a different time in their life when maybe husbands have disappeared or whatever.
Oh, I think that could be
Absolutely,
magical.
it'd be
Oh, well,
wonderful. I
think
would love
about
that.
this, because this takes place right before the French Revolution. A lot of people's husbands disappeared. But all joking aside, let's get back to that moment that Nicole was talking about, when they're stoned and in bed together, and she draws the picture that she puts on page 28 of the book of herself, so she has that, so that Eloise has that to remember Marianne by. I think there's an interesting metaphor there. Maybe I'm reading too deep into this, but I do have some ladies who love ladies in this room who can correct me if I'm wrong. But did you see a metaphor in the fact that she puts the mirror between Eloise's legs, and that she's literally seeing herself between her lover's legs for that moment? Or is that my male gaze? Am I reading that into the film?
I think it's just clever blocking. It's a great way to show both actors in the scene. But I would say, in terms of showcasing women's bodies, specifically like for the time period, I did like that they had, hair under their arms. And so there wasn't, like, usually you see these kind of like period dramas, like you think Shakespeare in Love and stuff, and it's everyone is a little overtly modern. And so I at least appreciated that detail, that there was a naturalness to how their bodies were showcased. And so that's my two cents.
I agree with that, because one thing I noticed watching it is that they were beautiful, but they weren't Hollywood beautiful. They were not perfect, but they were beautiful anyway. And we need to recognize that beauty is not perfection.
and I asked my mom not long ago if her mother shaved her legs, and she thought about it a minute and said, no, they didn't do that back then. One generation ago, right? So who started that trend? Can you say
Advertisers.
patriarchy, wanting young
Yeah, the
girls?
patriarchy and advertisers did a lot
No,
of
and
that.
wanting
Yeah,
young girls.
smooth and
Let's go back to
hairless.
that.
Ugh.
Yeah. I would challenge the women are gorgeous, right? Not, I agree exactly what you said, that they're a more natural state, but they are not just beautiful, they're gorgeous and stunning in that I believe that women in their natural states in that sort of way are gorgeous, and in any state. I agree on the level of patriarchy. I'm going to go down a hole, and I'm going to do sort of an ask some forgiveness from some folks in the room with that, and let me go for a minute, and we'll see. But I have a few that I want to get at. Well, first one is the film is out there to be made. That's going to go to the point of, if this film were to be made, it should be made by Sciamma, and I would hope that they would make it, because it goes back to this. Yes, Sila, I agree, and I love your open-mindedness in that this is a human love story, because love is love, and this was human growth, and I am so grateful that you saw it from that lens and everything. But that's amazing. However, there's an amazing impact and poignancy to this film that Celine made it. That is a female-driven film, a lesbian-driven, a queer-driven film, a female gaze-driven film. And I understand that there is the male gaze and the patriarchal gaze, but everything about this is different gazes from that female perspective. And yes, I understand you want to say it isn't queer. However, that is one thing that is incredibly uh, significant about this film, is that it is a sapphic, it is a female perspective, which and sure, it shows also a human gaze and human perspective and learning you can get from it, but it is so powerfully significant. Yes, there are human stories and human gaze and growth through this, but I cannot say enough that there is not enough female voices, sapphic voices in film, that the entire world of for a very long time, including these women on this island, including us in that time, how far back in history, and right here in this room in this 2025, the differences in a male gaze, a patriarchal system, a place of, and I don't, and please take this from respect, but from a male gaze, from privilege, from a world that is built for you, that films are built for you, that ideas of women's beauty that are built for you, this whole idea of women as chattel, the fact that there is this sapphic film made by a sapphic filmmaker with a lot of women involved, and then creating this world, this sort of modern Isle of Lesbos, would you say, to have this paradigm where it is significant to show the interactions of this sisterhood of these women and their interactions and their dynamic and their love. I I I I really will stand with there is a level of feminism and lesbianism and queerness and an issue of the gaze, of shifting this gaze. And yes, GAZE gaze allows a human perspective for anyone, an idea of growth, an idea of love is love. That's an amazing impact that I think women and the female GAZ allows, our mindset allows that openness of thought. And I will grant you, Sila, that you had that, but it is so important of how rare this is to the point of what Cinema Sisters does, to the point of looking at this film from that gigantic, significant perspective in every aspect of that mirror, of all of the portraits. If you go through the film again, thinking of all of the impact of all of the things like what Chrissy said about class, and because where is that from? From patriarchy, from male gaze, from now all the way back through this film and way back in history. And it's not, it just is the reality of what has been and what is. But coming from a female, a queer perspective, uh, to me, I cannot say enough how important and moving that is, and the hope to allow other people to perhaps pause and say, wow, all right, I can see this, to the point that these women are sold, to the point that these women are stuck in their casts, to the point of all of these things. Like even with Carol, sure, Carol was trapped by her husband and her husband controlling her money and her husband controlling her ability to have access to the child that she grew and birthed, which is part of why she did abandon and run. Aside from, I agree, boredom and other things, I agree all of those things are true. But part of that, again, is this, and I sound like a really angry feminist, and I am also a humanist, and I understand we all exist and we are all important, but there is and has been an inequality and a disparity, and being a female and a feminist trapped in a world that is so male gaze in everything, to have this point and this discussion that you're allowing and letting me speak, thank you. Because to open that thought, I hope it's other people agree with me and you're all letting me go, but do you get the power in that on every level, financially, economically, maritally wise, children wise, abortion wise, the painting wise, like so many things, even the music and the access to music and the path of women's lives and they could do and what they can't do. Every impact is infected by that.
I could
Absolutely.
not agree with you more. I could not agree with you
Absolutely.
more, Jen.
We need more films like this until everybody thinks about them the way Sila does. That's why we need
Right.
these films.
I'm very thankful for what Erin just said, because I feel I need to clarify something.
Okay.
We especially in the film rooms, for some reason, that is the only place where I consistently hear about the gaze, GAZE. I will go so far as to say, and I just came up with that now, listening to Jen, I'll go as far as to say, I don't have a male gaze. And that is the reason I said what I said at the beginning, because I don't need, that's the way I grew up. Maybe I might be a unicorn. Maybe I might be very weird. I may be actually mentally sick. But my point is not to say that we should not entitle such a film lesbian or LGBTQ. I was just referring to what I perceive and what I perceive in the film and enjoy it without the necessity to call it heterosexual, homosexual, or anything other than those titles. And the joy that I find in this film, like I said before, about how especially these three women grow in very intense ways in those 6 days and then the extended period after the 6 days. I find that extremely profound, extremely beautiful, extremely important for anybody to see. And I will add something that I just thought about. When I think of certain people that I know, some of them are friends, some of them should not be friends, but either way, when I think of certain individuals that I know in my regular life, I wish they would see this film without the warning that it is lesbian or that or knowing at all that it, so they learn a certain aspect that they would not learn if they would be advised that it's a lesbian film. So that is the essence of not what I'm trying to say, but what I'm trying to convey from what I am. And the reason I enjoy music or film in the way I do, for me, it has a lot to do with the neutrality, if there's such a thing, that I'm not saying I don't want to hear that word. I'm not saying I don't want to be entitled that way, the film. I'm just saying that I think the essence of being whatever one is gains a lot more of its importance, of its essence in the transmission when we just look at what is without the label or without mentioning who is looking at this. I am looking at it. I don't care who's looking at it. I am looking at it. And with that, I'll connect to what I meant to say before in terms of Vivaldi. I'm very heavily into coffee. But I would never tell someone who goes to 7-Eleven every day that they're drinking bad coffee. That's their choice. And I would never play Vivaldi's music, but I cannot speak against it. Namely, there are many of his pieces that are very famous and very loved and appreciated. And that's this individual gaze, this individual perception, for me, is that really what counts.
And that's important. I agree with you on a lot of that. There's a thing, though, that the male gaze is so prevalent in what we see, especially in America, that we don't realize that we're seeing things that way until it's pointed out to us. And that's why films like this are so
Yes,
important, is
yes.
it gives us another perspective that we realize, hey, wait a minute, maybe we've been thinking about things the wrong way. Like, okay, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and God, I hated rom-coms forever because I never liked the female characters. And then I saw someone posted online about, they always hated the female characters because they were written by men who hate women. And you don't think about that when you're growing up, when you're a kid. You just think, oh, these characters are horrible and I'm not like other girls, until you realize, actually, you are like the other girls. They're not what's being conveyed by men who don't know what we're like. And that's the male gaze. It's like it's tailored to what they expect men to want to see. And that shouldn't be the universal perspective. And that's why I appreciate that you don't see things that way, because everybody should take things the way you're saying, where it's ideally everybody would have their view and everything would be human and universal. But unfortunately, we just don't live in that world yet. And that's why we have to keep fighting for that world.
And I don't think it's
Well,
just American. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'd like to say something
No,
real
it's
quick.
definitely not only America.
Well, like blue is the warmest color. The Ketchkes, what was it, 2013? I mean, huge hit. About
Well, let's stay
oh,
on.
wait,
Let's
let's stay on this film. Yeah, we'll come back to that film.
But you get my you get my point. It's not just American. I mean, when I make fun of French film, that's what I'm making fun of, right?
Well, specifically with this film, with Portrait of Lady on Fire, I want to speak to, like, in terms of I love that this director sought out to make something very sapphic, very for women loving women. So even though that the film is has a broad appeal that other people who aren't of that community can enjoy it for the storytelling, that's great. But I think they specifically sought out to make kind of an epic love story, and they were successful. And for someone who is always craving and hungry for positive and authentic queer representation, this one is like a big rainbow flag waving me over to go see it in theaters, to buy the DVD, to support this filmmaker and whatever else they make. I think that's important. I think visibility is important. So I would actually I prefer and I love when a film is just unapologetically queer. And I think this film actually does that in a way that is has, like I said, broad appeal, but it doesn't shy away from this is what it is. And so if you're an audience member like me who is always hungry for that representation, you're going to really enjoy this film. And if you're someone who's not a part of the community, you can enjoy the storytelling and the beautiful aspects of the painterly look of the film and all the film techniques that they brought to it. But in terms of this hitting the mark for the type of representation I want to see and the type of storytelling I want to see, this is a 10 out of 10 for me. So if anyone is new to this film, I hope they seek it out. I hope they, I feel like it's a gold standard for the type of queer representation I want to see more of in cinema.
Yes, yes, yes. And we're not hungry for it. We are starving for it. And thank you, Erin, for what you said. And Sila, I hope you understand. I agree. Nicole paired that up very nicely. I understand you're human. You have a human gaze and a human perspective. I am asking you with that
Correct.
human
Correct.
perspective to back out in the lens and hear what Erin just said, what I just said, what Nicole just said, what Laura piped in. I would even gather to bet that Chrissy would agree. I can't speak for them, but we are starving for authentic stories that are our
I, I,
stories.
I understand that and I appreciate that. This is going to sound a little bit stupid. um, I have one of my best friends is in London. We happened to meet while I was living in London for a short time in a very interesting way. He's gay. Um, I I sit with him and I talk with him because I want to not necessarily understand, but I want to be part of what he lives, part of what he gazes at, and is not to take a side or not to be labeled anything, but I'm just interested in speaking with my son about uh, why does he like rap music? To me, that's really rubbish, but he likes it and he does it. And he just finished a master's degree in Barcelona dealing with certain things that I don't really get. But I grew up this way with my parents, especially my father. I'm very interested in understanding why the Japanese do what they do, and understanding why a lesbian does what. So I'm not pushing away from putting a label on the film. It was just my very particular angle as to my enjoyment of the film, even though I don't need to use that label for myself, but just the high quality of the film in many, many, many ways to me was there because it is a good film, period.
Laura, I
Agreed. And
saw
you
you on mic
understand.
next.
Oh, sorry. Go, Laura. I was going to say, just first, you understand that I'm not attacking your perspective that you're
No, no,
defending.
no, no. Everything
Okay.
is fine. Yes.
There's more, but go, Laura, first. Go.
Sure. Sila, I just wanted to say that when you first started making your point, I was skeptical because you started off with, I don't have a male gaze. If you didn't have a girlhood in America or anywhere in the world, that is significant to this discussion because you would not know the depths and the pain from patriarchy and misogyny that a girl and a woman goes through her entire life. But as I listened skeptically to you building your point as you requested, when you got to the very end and said, let the people watching it get what they get out of it as a human, basically. I have to agree with that. But I also have to agree with the other women on this panel that as a lesbian or as a queer woman or whatever, we are starved for representation. And I challenge you to go find the film Bulletproof, A Lesbian's Guide to Surviving the Plot, and watch that film. I think it would be eye-opening if you haven't seen it, Sila.
But don't watch Blue is the Warmest Color. You'll learn nothing.
Oh, we're not going to go there.
I know we're
We can
not.
point that out. We're going to pin that. I would also say "Love Me, Bait Me," the power of queer representation is another one. I
Absolutely.
thank you, Laura. And I'm going to go to one more thing. I agree. It's a humanist gaze. And you also said you like to learn, understand. You are an ally and a human that I want to walk the planet with, Sila. And I hear that. I love that. I would like you as that human to hear or hope to take some time and maybe spend more time with us, that you're backing up and understanding that pain and perspective that Laura's talking about. And even with the gay, Gay, male, or Achillean, I'm going to go back, male loving, male aligned versus Sapphic, female loving, female aligned, gaze, female gaze, right? But they're very different things. And a gay male gaze, I'm going to put it out there, also comes from, let's say it, the patriarchy,
The
from
patriarchy.
the patriarchy. And I know you don't get that. Maybe you do. I was rude. I apologize. I take that. I renege that entirely. I don't know whether you do. I don't know that anyone that listening does, but I would ask you to pause and reflect and try to get that. It's like this whole debate, which we're not going to go down either, but just to put it out there to think about, like, you're in the woods. Do you choose the man or the bear? The amount of perspective in that people don't get, it's 1,000 bajillion% the bear, because we walk through the world in that pain, in that perspective, under a male gaze, under threat, under being somebody else's property, under this patriarchal classist system, under so much that it is so deep. And even Erin, you brought that up, right? Like, it's so gigantic, but it is way bigger to us because we live it. And the sort of, you brought up the Me Too movement, of the dismissiveness of it. Like, we're getting only a teeny bit of the iceberg, but to exist as a strong, sapphic human being and that I am proudly that, and I will proudly say it, and I will take up that space for the people that can't or won't. And we need this. 100%. We are starved for this representation. Nicole, you nailed it with that summary piece, and Erin, everyone. I mean, everyone on this panel is giving great perspective, and I'm grateful that you are allowing this dialogue and this discussion, because it is germane to our next phases of growth.
I
I just
want to
want to say
talk
I
to
love this
Erin real
discussion.
quick. Go ahead,
Okay.
Erin. But
I just want to
I
say
had a question for you first.
Okay. I just want to say I love this discussion so much. What's your question?
So we talked last week when we were talking about the reaction to John Dielman. I'm just going to end it. Yeah, John Dielman.
You don't have to read the whole thing. You
Just
don't have to say
say
the
her
whole thing.
name.
Just John Dielman.
No, it's become a running joke now, Sila. We were talking about the reaction to it being voted number one in 2022. And when this film came out, 2019, I saw this on Valentine's Day 2020. It was actually the very last film I saw before lockdown for COVID. So that's, let's say, 5 years. And my reaction coming out of it and my reaction this time were changed because, and this, I hate to say this out loud, but it's something we talked about last week. Women's rights and the marginal community's rights have gone back so far in just the last 5-6 years since when this film was in theaters that I don't think I was as hopeful this viewing as I was in 2020 when I saw that film. And since you had, and I, when I was editing it, I had a little ball in my throat listening to what you said about how you felt about women's right last week. Could you, is that something that you felt as well? Just kind of almost sentimental for only 5 years ago, the way I was rewatching this, and then I'll open that up to the rest of the panel.
Honestly, it wasn't, not while watching the film. The film was brilliant. I loved it so much. It just gave me so much hope and warm fuzzies watching it, because I mean, you don't see films like this. You don't see this kind of relationship. You don't see women portrayed this way, like, at all. And with the rise of misogyny, I feel that nostalgia for even, 2015. I feel that, how things look like they might be going up. And then we get this blight in the White House for 2 terms, split between, elections. And we're seeing all of our rights being rolled back, and we're seeing this insane stuff happening. We saw them pack the Supreme Court, and then we saw them do exactly what we knew they were going to do by rolling back Roe versus Wade. I didn't feel any special nostalgia watching this film, because I've been feeling it constantly, especially since last election cycle. It's life is hard right now, especially for marginalized communities, especially for queer folks. It's people are being demonized in a way that we haven't seen for a very long time, because it's not just talk anymore, it's action. And things are getting extremely scary. So this film was a welcome oasis from all of that, to be perfectly honest.
Which film are you referring to, that one? The Janine Deanne Dielman or the Portrait of a Lady on Fire? I
Portrait
apologize.
of Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
We've raised enough of a dialogue or discussion that for me, especially on a humanist perspective, on an open-minded learning and growing perspective, if you wanted to compare and contrast this film, I can't say it right, the Janine Dielman, that film that you've referenced that you did last week with this film, and that was the
No,
two.
nobody knows how to pronounce it, so don't worry. Yeah, it's
What I
unpronounceable.
Yes,
would
so
No
love
worries.
Sila
to
corrected
ask
me too about it.
What I would love to ask is, okay, I didn't know that. I would love a chance and a little bit of time to watch both films again with the perspective, and maybe invite another dialogue in the comparison of that and the perspective. Um, just for thought that maybe we're not done with the dialogue and there's more to say on this. And I think we could have some great growth here.
And Chantal Ackerman, who directed John Dielman, was a queer filmmaker. Just to dot that I.
Oh, amazing. Okay. And Chrissy, you and Mike?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that this film is brilliant in that it examines relationships between women. It's done by a queer woman about a interaction that is queer. I thought it was like what cinema could aspire to. So when I think about movies like with disabilities, like I want movies made by disabled people and people with disabilities to be making movies about people with disabilities. And I want this, Portrait of a Lady on Fire to be one of the things that's held up as a standard of, nothing about us without us, with and all of how those kinds of films and this film will bring all of cinema to a higher level if they would follow the standards that this movie has set. So I really think it really hit the bullseye as far as like where I think cinema should be going, and the hope of the creative community in responding to this, murderous, genocidal, political moment.
Tell us how you really feel.
Oh, I always do. Just ask Jen.
Okay, and so Erin Brown, let's have your final thoughts.
It was a beautiful, beautiful film. It was, I mean, the look of it, the relationships, the acting, the casting. I love the "not about us without us" concept. I love that, because this was very clearly done by someone who knew what they were doing and knew exactly what they wanted to say in a way that would resonate with other folks like them. It was just so beautifully done. And I love the idea of doing another episode where we compare it with John Dielman, which I probably mispronounced, and Sila can probably correct me. No, I loved
Nobody
it.
knows
I
how to pronounce
absolutely,
it. Nobody.
yeah. I can pronounce the Jean parts. The Dielman, I don't speak German, so
Guillemot.
no, Dielman
Well,
is the
no,
French.
we established that that the French change it to the French. No matter where your name is from, it becomes French as soon as a French person says it.
That's true, but that doesn't mean I'm saying it correctly. Anyway, I would love to do another episode where we compare and contrast the two films. That would be so fun. This has been great.
Well, if we hadn't had such a big crowd show up for this one, that was my original plan for this episode. But I like the way this episode turned out. So there you go. I think it's better than the one I planned. Sila Blume, your final thoughts on Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
I find the film to be exceptionally good. I like the tempo very much. The tempo also in the microscopic view, not just as a whole, but for example, when they're having that short discussion about orchestra and organ music and trying to figure out what it sounds like, and she says one cannot relate music. The angle of the camera, namely she avoids, I don't know for what reason, I suspect I know why, but I'm not going to say it because it's not relevant. But she is playing a piece she loves, and she is not. They don't show her hands playing. I think I've seen many films where the people cannot play, but they are instructed how to do it, including Green Book. This actor Ali Mashallah, he cannot play. He looks in the film as he can play, but he cannot. So I was surprised that they didn't show it. But I like this approach, this very slow approach to the topic they're doing in that moment, and the approach to the harpsichord or clavichord, whatever instrument she had there, and that they do not show the keys, that they do not show her playing, but this is a moment of them getting close together, and the whole aspect of growing into what they are individually and with another. I found that very, very well done. I liked very much the how should I say that, the aesthetic of the film, not just the 18th century feel, but I think it went further than that. And like you mentioned before, they stayed true to the hair under the armpits, which I think too many people would take that out. But I really like the genuine aspects of the film as a pure story of love. The end, where I find she's, of course, experiencing finally what it is to witness an orchestra, but obviously with the connection to that love. And I don't like to refer to the real love or to or to reality. For me, those things don't exist. What you are in that moment is real, and the love they had was love. It doesn't matter what we want to call it. But I really, really enjoyed the film. I think it's a very good film. Thank you.
Thank you, Sila. Chrissy, your final thoughts on Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
A brilliant film. Nothing about us without us. I hope that films like this will be seen and become a standard of what film could be.
Short but to the point. Laura, your final thoughts on Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
I'm hoping that the legacy of this film is that similar to The Handmaid's Tale, where women understand that there's power in sisterhood. It's very important and it can change the world. So brava to the filmmaker, and I loved it.
Thank you, Laura. Nicole, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I just think this is such a great, like I said, it's an epic love story. I love that it's set within a historical setting, and it's a reminder that queer people have always existed. We've existed throughout history. We've existed in society. And so this is just kind of like even though it's kind of a period drama, it's still kind of like a historical reminder of that. And it's a contemporary reminder of that, this is how we fight back with art. And this is one of those beautiful films that celebrates art and women loving women. So I hope anyone who has not seen the film takes the time to seek it out, watch it, buy the DVD, support the filmmaker. It's just such a beautiful film.
Thank you, Nicole. And Jennifer, last but not least, take us home. Your final thoughts on Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Ooh, I don't know that I have that power. I think the power I would stand in is the community of this dialogue and discourse and perspective, and using film as a chance for dialogue, discussion, perspective, growth, and to be um, seen, heard, valued, loved, respected, accepted, safe. And, films by us, about us, for us is we are, I'm going to stand in it, starving for it. Um, I'm going to throw out one thing of just even the perspective of you had talked about in history, and I keep talking about the patriarchy, but there's the issue that this is a female-driven film from a female and Sapphic and queer perspective in a world where, sure, our rights have been rolled back and things are going, but let's be clear, those rights were rolled back from a point that we have never and have not been in anywhere on the planet, in any country, equal as human beings. And I don't know how much that can, people are like, oh, you are. We're not. We have never been. We are still a lower cents on the dollar. We still do not have sovereignty over our own bodies. It was only in my lifetime in the 70s in this country that we had sovereignty over our own money, our own healthcare. And we weren't even equal before that. And we moved, we advanced, but we were never there. And now we're going backwards. So the perspective, the dialogue, the chance. Yes, from somebody who watches a lot of film and is starving for authentic 2S LGBTQI plus or queer representation, and is on top of that starving for authentic female driven sapphic stories about us, for us, made by us, that allow human perspective, a human love is love, understanding perspective, but is authentically our voice. We need more of that, and we need people, as Nicole says, to support that world, to rate it, review it, buy it, support things like this podcast that allow a dialogue and discourse about this. Yeah, we have to work together to be the change we want to see in the world. And we have to stay hopeful, and discussions and spaces that are sapphic or queer or even allies that are part of that world is part of queer resistance, human resistance, and queer joy. And we need that more now than ever. And these type of spaces and these discussions are the places and spaces. Art is often the space that is the catalyst for the change that we need and that we want to see in the world. So thank you for everyone for being part of that. And please be inspired to be part of that change you want to see in the world and take an active part. That's what I would ask. And thank you to everyone here for the dialogue and the discourse and the powerhood of the humans in this room and the sisterhood in this room. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, because this has been so great. I've loved this discussion this whole time.
I first saw this film on Valentine's Day in 2020. I was on my third date with a woman I'd been set up with a friend from work. She was she taught art history at a junior college, and I didn't know anything about this film. I didn't know it had any sulfuric content. When they do kiss, it actually came as much as a surprise to me as it probably did to the two characters, and I was extremely appreciative of the use of 8K, the lack of graininess, the ability to shoot in low light and still be able to see. I was watching it and I had assumed that my date as a art historian would appreciate it on that level. But at dinner, I found out quite the opposite, because she was just incredibly angry about this. Like, why would you take someone on a date to a movie like this? And it blew my mind, because this was, to me, the most romantic film I had seen probably since In the Mood for Love. Yeah. And unrequited romance to me is such a rare thing in film, and even more rare when it's done well. I can name on my hand maybe this, maybe Brief Encounter, maybe In the Mood for Love, and I was so incredibly moved. And I couldn't get to the bottom of what was making her so angry. And then she was almost in tears because I probably was pushing too hard. And in my question, she'd say, and with their perfectly plucked eyebrows and high cheekbones and big doughy eyes, and why you think I'd want to see that? And so when my friend asked me the next day how things were going, I said, I don't think we're going to see each other again. And she said, why not? And I said, we don't share the same taste in film. And my friend, who I'd known for several years, knowing me as well as she did, said, well, then that wasn't going to work. Anyway, let's do our social media roundup. And before we give out our social media handles, I do want to say we did get some really good reception on the, I'm not going to do it, John Dielman episode last week. Nobody correcting pronunciation, actually, but Sila, someone named Hillary, was very complimentary. Not the Hillary we know. She said it was very good to finally hear Sila laugh after listening to the show for 2 years. And he can even be funny. He told a great joke about confusing the rock band The Eagles for the sporting team. Hillary, I hate to break it to you, I don't know for sure that Sila was joking. But I did have one person who took me to task for saying I did not like The Godfather, but it was in a very polite way. He said, did you mean that you didn't like The Godfather as a film, or did you mean that you simply feel like it was overrated? No, I meant that I did not like The Godfather as a film. That being said, I need each one of you. I'm going to go around and just ask for where people can find you on the internet. So, Erin Brown, where can people find you on the internet?
I am on Blue Sky at Toad Puppy, and I'm on YouTube at Pizza Horse Productions.
Sila Blume, same question.
I could be found at silablume.life. That's where I do most of my work. Thank you.
Chrissy, same question.
I have a website, which is Dykumentary, so DYKEUMENTARY, documentary.com.
Laura, same question.
Ours is www.cinemasisters.com, and it's spelled with a Y, SYSTERS.
Nicole, same question.
I can be found on Dark Rainbow Films on Instagram and YouTube. Very accessible, so please reach out.
And last but not least, Jennifer, where can people find you on the internet?
Gilbert Baker Film Festival, www.gilbertbakerfilmfestival.lgbt. We are on all the socials. I can be found adjacent to all those socials. I'm Jennifer.A.Trujillo1 or Jackdog on most things. And I agree, I am open for connection or discussion. So thank you.
And if you want to stalk me or correct my pronunciation, I'm at ETROMMATER at the artist formerly known as X, formerly known as Twitter. We are at World Cinema Hist on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. And Erin has a brand new website if you want to support us so we can get the better equipment so that you can have a better listening experience. That is ko-fi/World Cinema History. Thanks again, and join us next week for Lena Wertmuller and Seven Beauties. Have a great one.